Well, this is going to be a complete playthrough of the first episode of Wolfenstein 3D. This was originally released in 1992, and it was really the first-person shooter ever developed. If you saw the full episode I did on id Software and Wolfenstein, I laid out how the game engine they used became available for other companies to use themselves. They would license out the engine and they could develop other games such as Duke Nukem. The same company actually developed Quake and Doom later on, but Wolfenstein was sort of the first one. It was the genesis of first-person shooters. And while the graphics are sort of what you would think of as lame now, especially I think these kids, they're pretty good for the time. And the idea was a very interesting one. I've never really seen a game like this before. One thing I want to point out is in this game, it's not a perfect game. It's a very fun game. The one thing I would change is I would probably not include the dogs. There are Nazi dogs in this that you sometimes have to kill. I don't like the idea of killing dogs because I love dogs. So I've sort of avoided that. There are some instances where you have no choice but to do it, which you'll see. But on this level, there are some ways to avoid it, so I'm just going to avoid it where I can. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine shooting Nazis. And I think that's also what made the game a little more, accepted and less controversial compared to other first-person shooters that came out afterwards, is that it's a little bit easier to make Nazis, your enemy in a game because, well, they're Nazis. So, that's why. There's also some hidden rooms in the game. As you can see, I've located a couple already. I don't know all the hidden rooms. You're not going to see that in this playthrough. Sorry. This is just sort of done on memory, really. This is a game I got when we got our, first IBM PC back in, 92, 93. And this was a game that whoever sold it to us included on it. And originally this was, this first episode of the game was included for free. It was basically a free game, and the idea was you get the first one for free, and then you would want to get the other ones later on. And it was a very successful business model because it's also something that's, used today in some degree. But at the time, it was also sort of a new business model for video games, for computer games. The idea that you'd give a game away and then people would subscribe and get more games was sort of a new idea. It wasn't something they were sure would work, but it did actually work. It worked quite well for the company, for id Software. And actually this secret little room I found right here that I remember, it's going to take you to a secret level. That's just sort of more of a bonus level for you to, kill more Nazis and get a few extra things. After you complete the secret level, it will take you to what is level 2. So you can see there I didn't kill everyone because I avoided the dogs. I got all the secrets, but it looks like I missed a treasure. I must not have picked them all up. My bad. Alright, here's the secret level. It's labeled level 10, and it's the most unique one. It has very different walls. It still has some secrets. It's got a lot of enemies as well that you can just kill. All of them Nazis, as well as some dogs. Like I said, I tried to avoid the dogs. There's really only two kinds of soldiers you can kill in this thing. You got the brown shirts, who are easy, and then you got the, the tougher ones in blue that have all machine guns. Now, there is a final boss at the end of this first episode that is, tougher to beat. I think I read that he had about the strength of 40 of the brown shirts. So he's a tough boss, but he's not impossible. I've beaten him before, and I will not quit until I beat him for you guys here. Like I mentioned earlier, this was one of the first games I got on our IBM PC. Before that, I was accustomed to the Apple II and the Apple Macintosh, which was, I guess, the early Macintosh, obviously, not the one that came out in the late 90s. The iMac, I think, is what was technically called. But for the IBM PC that we got that my parents got for business, it was basically the first time I had seen Windows, as far as like the Microsoft Windows, and it was Windows 3.1, and it was kind of different. It was similar to the Macintosh, but it was also pretty different. Oh yeah, the dogs. I think I had to kill them to get through here. Sorry about that. For those who really want to protest, my bad, but I had to do it. Like I said, I don't kill the dogs unless I have to. But, like I was saying about the Windows, it was the first time I'd seen the Microsoft Windows. It was, I guess, an operating system that had been out for a while, for several years, really, for almost a decade before I had seen it. But, like I said, I grew up in the 80s, and most of the computers I was exposed to at the time were Apples. That's what our school had. If you look at my Oregon Trail video, I go through the history of MEC and kind of why Apples became the go-to for a lot of educational institutions and schools, and that was mainly just because they would be able to sell them at cost, really. The idea was trying to get as many apples into schools as possible to expose people, especially young people, to the apples and get them sort of hooked on it. And it worked. I became sort of a devoted Apple person. I did have a PC. I actually used both PC and Macintosh alongside for many years, up through Windows XP. I think I had Windows XP up until about 2012 when they stopped updating it, because I thought XP is a great operating system. But I also loved the Mac. I loved the OS X operating system, and currently Mac's sort of the only one I use right now. I never really used the Windows beyond XP. I didn't go to Windows 7 or anything like that. I sort of gave up after XP stopped their updating. And I don't really regret that. I love Apple. I think they make the best products, which is why I use them. It's what I also use a lot of times for video editing, just because they make really great software. And a lot of people probably prefer Premiere or Avid, or a lot of the other editing softwares, and that's fine. And if you're not even like a professional, you're using just sort of some amateur editing software, that's great too, whatever works. For me, Final Cut works. I've learned that on a PC level, if you like Final Cut and you want to use a PC, Edius is one that's basically like a flat-out copy of it. It's basically like a clone with the same shortcuts and everything. Which is also, I'll say, a great piece of software because it's so similar. But, I'll just sort of do the little sig hail to Apple, if you will, if that's appropriate here. Probably not. Probably shouldn't be doing the Nazi reference, but I'm shooting them, so it sort of like evens out. I can do the Nazi joke and then I shoot 1,000 of them, so it kind of evens out. One thing to point out was in the beginning, if you saw the difficulty level, you have the 4 different levels. I picked the hardest one because it is a little bit more fun. The difference in them is mainly the number of enemies that you'll encounter. If you do the less difficult levels, you just have fewer people to kill. Where with the top level that I picked, I just sort of have quite a few more enemies. Each level has a different number, and if you can Google and you can actually look and see how many enemies are on each level based on the level of difficulty. And so I don't know exactly how many are on each level. It varies, but I know that you got the most amount on this Death Incarnate level. So that's what I'm doing. Because it's also more fun. Not really showing off. If I was showing off, I would try to learn where all the secrets were, and I haven't, and I just don't care. The room I just avoided had nothing but a bunch of dogs on it. That's something I remember, so I'm just going to avoid that one. And there's nothing in it that I need. Basically, if I'm going into a room, either I want to get all the treasure, or I got to get a key that will get me out of here. The idea of the game, the whole premise is that you're a soldier, American soldier, POW, and you're escaping from Castle Wolfenstein. This is technically the third installment of the series, which it did not even start. Muse Software started the whole series, and the guys there were such big fans of it that they wanted to kind of recreate it or do a sequel with it. And the best news for them is that the copyright had actually run out on the game. So they were able to do it without actually having to pay a copyright for it. And as you see, they were able to create a game that was even more fun than the original one that was ported over to the Apple II, the Commodore, several other systems like that. So it was very popular in the 80s. The original game really had to do with getting out of the castle, but your objective there wasn't necessarily to kill the Nazis. You could, I guess not capture them, but you could search them without killing them. Killing them was an option, but I think the idea was to avoid that and to sort of get intelligence and other items from them. It was kind of a different kind of game at the time. There are a lot of enemies on this difficulty level. I won't complain. Now we're on to level 3, which technically, I guess if you count the secret level, there are 10 levels. So I guess this is kind of level 4 if you go through that one. And a lot of the gameplay that you see is sort of based on things I remember. Some of it, as you can see, I can't remember everything, so I'll sort of try to open up the secret walls by hitting the entire wall because I can't remember exactly which one it was, because some of them are not as obvious as that, and I can't even remember exactly what's in all of them. A lot of times when you were playing the game as a kid, you would just sort of explore and try to find everything. And it was, one of those games that I sort of enjoyed looking around. I enjoyed a lot of the details. Like you saw the skeleton right there of the guy in the cell. You see the bones right there. You'll see guys hung up who are skeletons. And so there's a lot of detail that went into it. And, I guess at the time it was a little disturbing and probably even a little graphic, but like I said, compared to today's standards, it's pretty tame. With that being said, it's not really something I would want my toddler to play. of course. I'd much rather he just continue to play Sesame Street and watch Blippi. And if you don't know about Blippi, you just need to Google that. Because you will have those songs stuck in your head, like I do. Growing up as a kid, I was also very fascinated with World War II, as far as just the history behind it and everything involving it. It was kind of a fascinating time, I mean, if I had to live in the past, this would be an era I think would be most interesting as far as technology is concerned and culture and just, the world events. I think it would be a very fascinating time to live in the era of Indiana Jones movies and just everything like that. I think it's, the time period I would want to live in. Don't know if that's a very hipster thing to say, not trying to be hipster, but I do think it's a very cool time period. And some of these secret rooms have multiple secret rooms to them. As you'll see, I'm trying to find all of them, and I remember there's one much later in the game. I can't remember exactly if it's level 7 or level 8. Level 9 being the final boss, but somewhere around level 7 to level 8, there's one room that has literally 15 connected hidden rooms, and it's almost like a maze. So hopefully I can try to remember where that one is. Because once you find one of them and you know that there's more than one, it's kind of easy to just find the others on that particular one. Maybe this is a good time to point out that when I was making the video for the Wolfenstein episode, I did actually make some requests for interviews from some of the developers. One of them did return an email, I guess respectively declining it, and that had to do with the fact that there was a lawsuit involving some of the founders of the company. And so because of that, they weren't able to comment on anything publicly about it, which is kind of a shame. I understand that. I get it, and it's not like a huge deal. A lot of times when I do these videos, I do try to get the people that created them, try to get their stories and their opinions about it and sort of their point of view. I wasn't able to do that with this one because of that reason, and it's kind of a shame because the guys are so young. It's not like they're in the retirement phase like some of the guys that I've interviewed before. No offense to some of those other guys my age. But, it's a shame that I wasn't able to do that because of it. Maybe one day in the future when some of those legal issues are resolved, maybe I can do some separate Q&A episode or maybe a follow-up with it. Because I really would love to get their point of view about what the culture was like working at id Software and even before that, just to sort of get their point of view. Now I have the key to get in there, and I could easily finish up the level, but there's some bonus treasure I want to go try to find. if I can survive. And hopefully I won't run out of ammo. That's one of the things I thought was kind of interesting on the details, is that you don't have infinite ammo. And so on instances where I am running low, I'll probably switch the weapons around just so I'm not wasting so much, because that Gatling gun kind of fires a lot at one time. And so I'll switch to, I guess, the simple machine gun, which doesn't fire as much. And one of the details I think is really interesting is that you can actually shoot someone from very far distance and it can possibly hit them. So that hit detection goes a long ways. That was also something that was sort of different, is that you're shooting someone that looks like they're 100 yards away, and you can kind of hit them if you get pretty good aim. Never mind. Now, I mentioned earlier one of the negative things, or at least one of the things that I would change, is I would probably not include dogs in this. Another thing that I would probably change in this entire game is I probably would have wanted to add a multiplayer feature. Now, at the time, that was probably not as much of an option, because remember, in 1992, computers in your home, you basically had one computer in the home. And it was, having a computer in the 80s and 90s was like having a television in the 50s and 60s. You basically had one. These days, many families have multiple computers. And we sort of kind of expected that and predicted that at the time, like, in 20 years, 30 years, we'll have multiple computers like we have multiple TVs back then. And that's happened, but at the time, you just have one computer. So multiplayer games, when you were playing multiplayer PC games, you were sort of playing with strangers. You might be able to play with people you do know, but it felt kind of rare. You were basically playing with strangers. I think the first multiplayer game I remember at the time where you could actually play with your friends and was a lot of fun was GoldenEye. And this was on multiple platforms at the time. But this was where you could play with, 4 people at one time. And you could all hunt each other down, and you're all in the same room playing, unlike the PC games where you're playing with strangers online. So both formats, as far as playing with, over the internet and playing, with your friends in the same room, they were pretty unique and revolutionary. However, the technology was also sort of limited because, in 1992 you basically had Prodigy and AOL, I think, was just coming out. And if you don't remember, or if you weren't alive, I remember getting bombarded with numerous discs from AOL. And basically the idea of America Online was they'd send you a free disc, again, like episode 1 here, where you get the first part for free, and like with AOL, you try out for like your first 100 hours are free, and then you get addicted to it, and you basically, want to have more of it. That's what the business model was. We give you a sample for free, you try it out, you like it, and you can't live without it, so then you buy it for the rest of the time. And it works. It's a great business model. You can probably apply that for numerous things. You get a free sample, you love it, and then you come back for more. But PC technology at the time, you weren't really going to play the game with your friends in the same room. So I can kind of see why they didn't even go with that level. I believe Doom and Quake had some multiplayer stuff where you technically, you could technically play with your friends if you were able to find them, but that, in a realistic scenario, you weren't really able to. You were basically talking with total strangers on the internet. It's pretty different than it is today, where, it really feels like today you're not as anonymous. With Facebook and YouTube, it feels like, your identity can get verified. Back then, when you had just the random chat rooms, either on Yahoo or AOL, it was, you're pretty anonymous. If you're young and watching this, the whole joke at the time was that you're probably, if you think you're talking to a 18-year-old girl, you're really talking to some 40-year-old fat guy in his mom's basement. Well, that's because you probably were. But I'm not going to necessarily give negative marks for the lack of multiplayer. Regardless, first-person shooters like Wolfenstein and Quake and Doom, still did very well. But GoldenEye was the first one I remember distinctly being the multiplayer first-person shooter that you play with your friends. That's the one that you go over to a friend's house to play. That's the one that you all kind of look forward to. And I believe the first one I kind of remember playing was on the N64. I didn't actually own an N64. Ironically, that's one of the few systems I haven't owned. The N64 I kind of thought even at the time was, kind of lame, which is going to probably offend and upset a lot of people, but I thought the N64 was kind of lame. I thought the graphics looked kind of stupid. I actually preferred the Super NES graphics over the N64. I didn't think that the polygons really looked that great. And shortly after the N64 came out, you had the PlayStation, and you even had PC games that were looking better. So at the time, I didn't even care about the N64. And honestly, this is probably going to be the only first-person shooter I ever do any video with, mainly because it is sort of the first one that came out. I don't really have any intention to do Doom or Quake or any of them. Mainly because, I did play those games. I thought Duke Nukem was fantastic when it came out, but I still have very fond memories of this one. And this is what I would call the genesis of first-person shooters. So, is it the best one compared to the ones that have been released in the last 25 years? Well, no. I mean, graphics have improved, gameplay has improved. In this game, you can't even look up and down. Where in Halo, you can at least look up and down. So, is it the best one? No. But it's kind of like saying, is Duck Hunt the best game ever? No. But I really like Duck Hunt, and I have fond memories of it. So I think in the end, it's sort of a matter of personal opinion. And the game that was going to use this same game engine that I've discussed before was Hellraiser. That was a game that was actually never finished or released, and it was actually created by a third-party unlicensed developer. I covered that a bit more in my Pest Terminator video a while back. In that video, I kind of cover a whole lot of things. I'll reference the Pest Terminator video a bunch of times just because I covered a variety of things there as far as the NES lockout chip and lockout chips in general, unlicensed developers, stuff like that. So I tend to go back and reference my Pest Terminator video just because of that. But the Hellraiser game was going to look a lot like this because they had licensed out the engine and sort of had the same style as Wolfenstein. So it looked like it was going to be a real fun game. Some of the screenshots I've seen and some of the footage I've seen, it looks pretty cool. The music was great, but like I said, it was never actually finished or released. But it had, I think it would have been a real fun game. I think that I probably would have checked it out at the time. And another game that also used the same engine but sort of on a different level was this Super NES game called Super 3D Noah's Ark. And this one is where you play as Noah and you're trying to capture all the animals with a slingshot. And it looks just like this because it's, of course, using the same engine. And instead of a gun, you have a slingshot. And instead of Nazis, you have animals you're trying to capture while you go on the ark. That one was not nearly as successful as Wolfenstein. And actually, of all the games that use this engine and weren't released, such as Hellraiser, I'd rather Hellraiser have gotten released than Super 3D Noah's Ark. No offense to anyone that just loves that game. Now, I could go and finish the level, but I have a more nefarious plot planned. There's actually a secret room that leads to some other secret rooms, not like the one I mentioned a few moments ago. Basically, you hit one secret, and then it leads you to a bunch of other open rooms. But the one I was speaking of was you got to find a lot of secret rooms in a row. This one has a lot of hidden treasure and, of course, a lot of Nazis. I think there are some dogs here too. If I can remember where they are, I will avoid them. But again, a lot of this is just from memory. These rooms are sort of filled with either food, health, ammo, sometimes just people, nothing, and treasure. So there's like about 8 or 10 of them. Maybe not 10. I think maybe about 8 rooms. There's quite a few rooms, and so I can't remember exactly what's in all of them. And I'm not even sure exactly how many Nazis are hiding behind the corner. And you technically can't even access them without the key. So that was also a thing, is you got to have the key. Even if you find the hidden room, you got to have the key just to get to these rooms. And for those of you who think I'm paranoid when I'm looking around the corner and worried I'm going to get shot, fuck you, you make your own video. But look, there's a room with dogs. I can avoid it without killing them. Ammo. I definitely need some more of that. Not sure if I want to keep using the Gatling gun. Oh shit. I had to kill the dogs. Damn it. That sucks. Alright, now I will finish. I didn't even get all the secrets or treasure. But that's a nice little hidden room. If you happen to know about the other secrets, then go get them yourself. I gotta say, it is really nice to have the Gatling gun available. If you happen to die and lose it, it is available in several other hidden places, which is convenient. But my advice to you is don't die. You know, when id Software was actually making the game, it was reported that they'd spent only about a day making a single level for this episode, which is pretty remarkable considering how complicated they are and how much of a maze they kind of are. I mean, not that it takes that long to go through, but I definitely appreciate the complexity that the level is, as far as trying to find your way and trying to find secrets. And the fact that they only spent one day doing each level, you know, that's pretty impressive. You know, that's not really a whole lot of time, and they put, you know, a lot of, you know, work into this. So I'm very impressed with it. And speaking of which, the developers actually had added more, I guess, gore and violence and even Nazi symbols after the original distributor had actually said something about it. They felt like it was probably a little too violent with a little too many Nazi signs and too many, you know, dead bodies. So they just actually added more dead bodies and Nazi signs, which is kind of a little defiant move on their part. At the time, it was kind of violent because you really didn't have blood that much in games at all, and the fact that you spend the entire game just shooting people is, you know, one of the few games at the time where you really do that from this angle. I think it was this first-person perspective that really sort of changed that, made it look a little more violent, because you've always had games where you could kind of, you know, kill people in a way. You look at Contra was an early game, and you know, that's an early shooter where you're doing stuff, but this is the one where you can kind of get that first-person perspective, and it sort of, you know, looked different. It sort of gave a different kind of feel, and I think that was partially what drove some of the controversy, was the whole style. But that whole style is also what made it unique and original and different. It's a style that, of course, is, you know, still used today, obviously. In fact, I think that first-person shooters could be classified as an entire genre in and of itself. Yep, more dogs. I have no choice but to kill the dogs here, because the key is there. I bet PETA is going to blow a cartridge if I shoot another dog. Now this portion is not necessary for completing the level, but it will give you some extra treasure. Actually, a lot of extra treasure. And I believe there are some hidden rooms that have some health. Not in this room, but in this hallway, there's a hidden room that has some health that I don't think I'm in desperate need of. But I'm going to show you guys anyway. Once I get through getting all the crap. Yeah, I especially don't need the extra health now. But I'll go ahead and show you guys some of the hidden rooms. And throughout the game, that's what I've done. I've tried to show you guys some of the hidden rooms, even if I don't need all the stuff as far as ammo and health. This just so you can find them yourselves. Now, if you're wondering what happens if you actually run out of ammo, all you get is a knife. And it does work, but you gotta stab the guy like 20 times. So if you're being attacked by like several guys, you're not gonna make it. One thing to point out is with all the Nazi images and symbolism here, in Germany they actually banned that stuff, and so this game is actually been banned in Germany because of all that. Whenever they shoot World War II films, something of that era, they have to get special permission and special permits to actually do the Nazi flag, the Nazi soldiers, because it's a very sensitive thing for them in Germany. And actually, if you remember in my past Terminator video, I had mentioned how the same engine in the same game was really sort of converted over into a Noah's Ark 3D adventure, where you play as Noah and they replace your gun with like a slingshot and you're trying to capture all the animals. It's literally like the same game. But in regards to Noah's Ark, I don't mean to say that like they ripped them off. From my knowledge, they actually, licensed out the engine the way that other companies did. So it was a legitimate copy, if you could call it a copy. And that was one of the unique things that it did, is that they allowed the engine that they used to be licensed out. Before that, every time you made a game, you basically had to invent the hardware and software to do it. Up to that point, if you're creating a game like this, like they did, they created the engine for it. And that was their proprietary technology. This idea of creating the technology and letting other people use it for a fair fee, it was kind of new at the time. And I think that had they not done that, you would not have seen the explosion of first-person shooters. You would not have seen the creative outlet that a lot of artists use. And I think it is a creative outlet. I think that it allowed people who had, ideas to use technology that they didn't know about to sort of showcase those ideas. So in that regard, if there was a game system or some kind of technology that is very unique that other people could benefit from and use in a creative way, why not let them use it, of course in a legal way, let them pay their license fee, and let them create with it. That benefits the person that created it, and it benefits all of us, from the other people that are creating new things with it. And going back to that story about the hidden rooms, about 20 rooms within a hidden room, I believe this is the floor. I can't remember exactly which room it's in, but I will find it. It's one of those things where I can't tell you where it is, but I'll know it when I see it. And this is the last level that doesn't have a boss. Technically, I guess there's just one boss at the end of this episode. That's at level 9. And basically, what's kind of interesting is, you spend the entire game just trying to find the key and try to find the escape instead of, fighting a boss at the end. What's interesting was what was on the secret level at level 10 that I did right after level 1. That was a level that had this option, this little possibility that if you killed an enemy, you had a 1 in 256 chance that it would produce a fart noise. And it didn't do that when I was playing, or at least I didn't hear it, but it could have. And there were only 2 other levels in this series that did that, and I believe the other 2 were in episode 2. Both of them were, I believe, either floors 9 and 10 or 8 and 9. I believe it was 9 and 10. And those were the levels that could also produce the fart noise with a 1 in 256 chance. So if you play those levels and you hear a fart noise after killing an enemy, that's why. And it's kind of a rare occurrence, obviously. It's something I have heard before. I didn't hear it when I played this playthrough, but I do remember hearing it when I was playing it years ago. So I know that it exists, and while researching to do the video, I found other documentation and information that also verified it. So I wasn't crazy. It did actually exist. Hopefully when you guys play the game, you'll be able to find it in level 10 as well, because it's a nice little amusing antidote to have as you're killing a Nazi. That means they probably shit their pants. And I believe it's here. Yep, I believe this is it. Prepare for the maze. At the end of this maze, you'll get a little ammo, a little health, and probably some jewels. I can't really remember. Okay, so no ammo, just an extra life and some jewels. Works for me. Oh, look, the end of floor 8. And I believe floor 9 is where the final boss is at. Now, I don't have to stock up on ammo in this level before seeing him, because there's a hidden room in that level, I recall, that will let you stock up on ammo. Plenty of ammo. There's like 1,000 rounds in there, a lot of health. And so it's very easy to actually, you know, not die, assuming that you can hit the target. No, that's bad. Skip on.
Guten Tag.
Technically a level 10 if you count the secret room. The strategy is to, well, I guess the strategy is to not die.
Mutti.
Ah, he's dead. I did it. Sweet. And that is it. That is Wolfenstein Episode 1. Of course, I would not leave you guys without one last secret. And so that is it. Now, the idea of the game series is that you would purchase the other episodes, which I kind of recommend doing. These days, they're all free, available to play as is. You just have to find the right website. You can play them in Flash. Or if you happen to have the old floppy disks like I got, plug them in if you got a floppy disk player. And so the highest score will be the Bearded Nerd. Of course, anyone who plays gets a high score. It's kind of like Oregon Trail, where the programmers just put in those names, and that was it. That was Wolfenstein. I hope you enjoyed this playthrough. If you haven't seen the full video I did on Wolfenstein and id Software, I recommend you watch it. Other than that, this is the Bearded Nerd signing off.